This is Reah, and this is Just the Who of Us, where we talk about a range of topics including life events, current events, spirituality, entertainment, family relationships, as well as answering listener questions and more.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have Taylor Locke with us. Taylor is a very intriguing, very fabulous, very driven person. I actually met out through authoring or writing for Brains Magazine as well. And I'm really super excited to have you here with us today. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are going to just kind of get to know you and learn a little bit about you. And I'm also really excited to have you on here more than once. I love repeat guests, and I'm really excited to have you on here. So let's start off by telling us just a little bit about you and your passions.
Sure. So I'm involved in a lot of different kinds of advocacy work, particularly surrounding mental health advocacy. I got started doing that while I was in college. A little bit of an unusual path, I guess. I was actually in a military scholarship program for the Navy to work on nuclear reactors. So, was studying STEM and doing military stuff. But then I had some of my own challenges with mental illness that ultimately resulted in me getting medically discharged from that program. And it was through, I guess, my own healing journey where I discovered that it was really helpful for me and empowering to help other people. So I started working on efforts just on my college campus, and then I that kind of just grew really quickly, and now I'm doing stuff, you know, across the state, even across the world, and it's just been absolutely incredible.
You know, one thing that I want to kind of pay a little bit of attention to is the mental health component of being medically discharged from the military. And I think that a lot of people who experience mental health crisis, specifically in the military, either kind of try not to pay attention to it because it still, although not as much, it is still something that's a little bit stigmatized. If you are in the military, you're supposed to just kind of, well, you signed up for it, but all these things that people say, which is so not true because that's not what you sign up for when you go into the military. But I think a lot of people would kind of accept defeat or not understand. My ex-husband had a lot of PTSD and suffered from depression, a lot of things coming out of the military. And it was a journey for sure to kind of, hey, let's bring some attention to this because it's something that you're struggling with and you shouldn't feel this way. Let's get you some help kind of thing. I think, especially being young. I just think that it's something that a lot of people kind of shrug off. So I think it's really commendable that you took that and you said, hey, you know what? This chapter may be over, but now what can I do to help people who are also going through something similar to what I'm going through?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for for me, actually, because I know that there's a lot of historically stigma with mental health issues in the military, kind of a sort of parallel to the like don't ask, don't tell type of policies, but for mental health, where it's like, okay, you can be struggling, but we're not going to talk about it, and that's kind of like particularly for the military odd, I feel, considering how stressful of a job it is, and particularly people who are, experiencing combat. Like, you should be allowing them to have those open conversations and going to therapy to, process that trauma and to keep them combat ready and to be able to handle that high stress job.
Right.
So I know that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of mental health in the military. But for me personally, with my experiences, I actually felt very supported within my unit.
That's
Incredibly
great.
supported throughout the entire process. I was actually because I did have a suicide attempt my freshman year, so I was medically discharged after that. But they actually they evaluated my medical records, and I was admitted back into the program. And then I continued to be in the program for 2 more years, and then I started having more issues. So then it led to a reevaluation, and I sat down with my commanding officer, and we had a conversation about it. And was like, talk to your therapist, talk to your family, see what's best for you. We have different options because I was going to be going I'd already service selected to go into nuclear reactors, which is also a pretty high stress job environment. Working on a nuclear reactor on
Yeah.
an aircraft carrier or a submarine, like already stressful enough working on the reactor, but now you're doing it, in the middle of the ocean or even underwater. So
Right.
they're like, we can look for other alternatives if you still like to go into military, or if not, we can work on processing it as a medical discharge. And since it's a medical discharge, I wouldn't owe the military back for anything for the school that they had already paid for. So it was a very open and supportive process. So that was honestly like a surprise for me because that's not what I was expecting. Obviously, everyone's experience is different. I think it comes down a lot to your command structure, how your unit is structured, and the leadership of your commanding officer. So I guess in that regard, I lucked out. However, I was also in school at the same time because it was for ROTC program, and I did not feel supported very much, if at all, by my college. So that was kind of what also started making me want to go into that advocacy route. Whereas I was looking at it, was like I felt significantly more supported by the military than my academic institution, and just I feel like that's not the way it should be, just going
Right.
based off of like those stereotypes.
That's true. That's so true. I've never been in the military, but I, from what I've heard and from people that I know who have, it still can be very much a boys' club. And even though there's more and more women entering, it definitely is still a boys' club. Um, and is with a lot of institutions. If you don't fit quote unquote societal norms, especially within that organization, that also brings a little bit more of a target too. I want to talk a little bit about your founding of the NYS Mental Health Week movement. Um, Tell us what that is and kind of how that came about.
Sure. So that was really, I guess, what started me on the path to where I am today with my advocacy. Um, so I had been involved in some of like the mental health clubs and leading a couple of like support groups of students at my college. And then I was medically discharged going to my senior year. So I had a whole bunch of free time senior year where I was no longer doing all of that ROTC stuff, and also kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do with my life post college because I was set to go into the military. And now it was just like I was no longer confined to that one path. I had a lot of options. So we used to do something at my school before the COVID pandemic, during National Mental Illness Awareness Week, which is first week of October, where we would like do collaboration with a whole bunch of clubs and different programs to recognize mental health on campus. So I was working with students to be able to bring that back. And in the span of about 2 months, we were able to plan almost 100 hours worth of activities for students to participate in during that one week. We
Nice.
raised $5,000 almost entirely in student-led grassroots fundraising efforts. And we had a total of 50 different organizations, both on campus and off campus, participate in our culminating community fair, which was attended by the university president and had like live music and all of these different things. And it was entirely a student-led program. So it was just absolutely incredible. And kind of the momentum from that, we wanted to expand it to make it even bigger and better. Uh, Unfortunately, after that year's program, which was in 2023, the administration didn't exactly like what we were doing with mental health advocacy on campus, because one of the other things we did was we had collected some feedback from students on during the week about policy changes they'd like to see surrounding mental health issues, and we were working on a report to give to the administration with recommendations, and they told us to stop working on that, and we were like, no. So then they decided to pull all of our funding and no longer recognize the clubs, and we still tried moving forward even without the funding and without being officially recognized clubs. And then they like told us that we had to stop or they would be taking legal action. So it was like, okay, so we are not allowed to do anything on campus as students for mental health, which was really,
Yeah.
really upsetting and disappointing. But that was when we decided to expand it even more. So we made it into a community-based program. So we partnered with our local NAMI affiliate, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and we expanded it um, into now a statewide program. We partnered with, for last year's program, we had 11 other universities throughout the region that partnered with us after our school pulled out. I think we had like 100-ish organizations total that were partnered with us. And we
Amazing.
hosted during that week over 65 individual events.
Wow.
Uh, so, and again, this was just something that I started as kind of a passion project at the beginning of my senior year, which went through a lot of turmoil because of, I guess, how loud we were being with the advocacy stuff. But that also kind of told me that, like, hey, that response is telling me that we were doing the right thing.
Right,
And
right.
clearly, with how it turned out last year, was very, very empowering, both for me personally as well as all the other students that were involved with leading that.
Yeah, typically people don't like when people try to change things, and particularly for the better of the body of the people, it tends to make people want to tell you to sit down. But like you said, that's kind of how you know that you're getting something accomplished, because the people who don't want these changes to happen are pushing back. And I think it's how old are you, if you don't mind sharing?
I'm 23 now.
Because that's important. And doing things like this so young, it is really empowering, and it's really it's very influential, because not not to say that certain age groups of people can't get attention, but we know that when the younger generations start working to get the attention of powerful people, like, we mean business, because this is the generation, that the up and coming generation, that these are your generation that's turning into young adults, that's turning into adults, that's going to be the majority of the working class, and things like that. And these are the people that we really need to be listening to. Um, I, when you mentioned advocacy, I want to kind of touch on that briefly, because for me, when I say I am an advocate of the LGBTQ plus community, that means that I speak out, I'm supportive, and things like that. However, I am not changing any policies. So, there's levels of advocacy. There's supporters, and things like that. There's allies. But for, to define advocacy, and not to say that, well, just because I verbally or emotionally support someone doesn't mean I'm not an advocate for them. But I just think it's kind of important to point it out. There are big things that you can do as an advocate for a group of people, and you don't, it doesn't have to be as big as, okay, I'm going to change policies, but there's things that you can do locally in your community, or you can go as far as to say, you know what, I have the voice and the time and the power and the insight, and I'm going to do this. And we need people like that, because there's there's those of us who can't or won't. Um, Tell me a little bit about, I mean, you've kind of shown, but just the verbalize. Tell me a little bit about what advocacy is to you personally and why that is kind of this is my stance.
Sure, absolutely. So for me, I think a lot of my advocacy is work is still really centered around improvements in education directly with policies and institution, particularly institutions in higher education, just because that's where I started um, on my path. And also, I'm, like you said, still very young. I just graduated from college last year, so like not very far ahead in terms of professional like career stuff yet. So I'm still very tied to the education stuff. So I've obviously started with doing work in trying to push for policy changes within my alma mater. And I've also worked in tandem with other institutions um, through programs with Mental Health Week, with empowering students. We hosted a student-led town hall that was talking about the youth mental health crisis and specific actionable items that institutions are able to take in order to make improvements. So I think that's a really big component of advocacy too. It's not just writing policies and implementing them. It's also giving the space to be able to have those conversations because a lot of
Yeah.
times, particularly for young people, they're not offered the opportunity. Or when certain policies are being implemented, whether that's at the legislative level, at like state or federal level, or within the educational institutions themselves, that's just, the adults talking and putting policies in place that they think they're going to work, but they never actually talk to the youth, which are the people that are going to be affected by those policies. So
Yeah.
I think that's really a really important component of advocacy work that's kind of often overlooked. Um, and then I've also more recently have had the opportunity to work with Eli's for Rachel, which is an alumni group from Yale that won a landmark class action lawsuit against the school for discriminatory mental health and medical leave policies, similar to the types of policies that I was advocating for at my school. So I've had some opportunities to be able to work with them and cross collaborate with organizations from other institutions. And we've also been having discussions about some of the federal level legislation surrounding HIPAA and FERPA, um, which essentially, to like keep it short, is there's a loophole within the way that FERPA is written so that institutions can essentially classify all medical documents as educational documents and circumvent HIPAA. So, like, if a dean wants to look at your therapy records and you were going to the counseling center at the school, they have full access to that so long as the school lists it as an educational document without really any justification needed. So that's like a major oversight that needs to be corrected. So we've been having some conversations about that and doing some like work on wanting to change the policies there at the federal level. So it's been more recent, but really cool to say I'm a part of that. And also again, really important.
And for those of you who don't know, FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Um,
Yes, sorry.
no, you're good. Um, and HIPAA, I feel like most people know what HIPAA is, but in case, health insurance portability and accounting. I can't talk. Health insurance portability and accounting. Oh, all right, let me try to read it. See if this is better. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. I feel like most people are more familiar with HIPAA because you see the signs when you go into the hospitals and things like that. HIPAA is largely known for uh, privacy of your medical records and the right to treatment and things like that. Um, Whereas, tell us a little bit about FERPA, more so what that is, in I guess as opposed to HIPAA.
So FERPA, as you know, you just read the acronym, that's specifically just for um, the way that institutions of higher education operate in terms of particularly with information and collecting and storing documents. So it deals with a lot of like the privacy of student documents and who has a right to those.
Mhm.
And so that's where the loophole comes in, is because when you have a like a school's like health office or counseling center that students are able to go to, ordinarily that should be, medical documents that would be under HIPAA, but because it's a part of the school, there's a specific clause in FERPA that allows the school to classify any medical documents as educational documents pretty much at their jurisdiction with little to no oversight. And then
Yeah.
any school official has a right to those documents without needing to go through the proper channels that they would go for HIPAA. With certain things that make sense, like for vaccination records, there's not a lot of confidentiality there, but it's important for the schools to make sure that their students are fully vaccinated to be up to code with whatever laws that are required. But when you're dealing with a lot more sensitive information, particularly with, therapy records and things of that nature,
Right.
that really, really needs to be protected under HIPAA and making sure you're going through the proper channels. And so many schools are able to just circumvent that through that loophole in the way that FERPA is written.
Um, so you also briefly mentioned uh, GMH. What is the acronym for it?
GMHPN.
GMHP, which is the Global Mental Health Peer Network, correct?
Yes.
Um, Tell us a little bit about that and how one can access that.
Sure. So the Global Mental Health Peer Network, as uh, the name suggests, is a global network of peers related to mental health. So people are like, all the information and resources and stuff is like publicly available on their website. But then people are able to apply. I think we do applications like once every 6 months in order to join the country leadership committee. And then that's an appointment where you serve um, for uh, for 2 years as a representative from your country. So this is I'm just actually finishing up my first year now as a U.S. representative for the country leadership committee, because I was appointed around this time last year. Um, and I should also probably mention that we are also doing a name change from Global Mental Health Peer Network to Avis Mental Health, just because that's a lot shorter. But same organization. Um, but yeah, I was I was honestly shocked when I received the appointment, because it was not that long after I had graduated college.
Really?
Um, and it was like I just hadn't been doing advocacy stuff, I felt like, for that long, but I had at that point done um the stuff with Mental Health Week. So I think that's what really like helped me stand out with my application. And just over the past year, the number of opportunities I've had to be able to interface with other peers and advocates from across the world, collaborating on programs. I was very recently appointed actually to the board of management for the organization as well, which was again just absolutely surreal
Congratulations.
to me. Again, I'm 23 and I'm now sitting on a board for international organization.
Right.
Um, I will actually be flying out to South Africa in November for their seventh Global Mental Health Summit. where I will be giving a poster presentation about the intersection of mental health and politics. So yeah, just the number of opportunities I've had to do things again globally has just been absolutely insane and incredible.
Nice. So you briefly kind of mentioned this. What types of policies do you generally focus on trying to change or I guess modify and benefit of what it are there certain types of policies that you like this is my focus, this is my passion, or is it just kind of general rights?
It's a good question. Um, I feel like it's still like pretty central around mental health, but also I feel like just because of the interconnectedness with, mental health and really a lot of other basic human rights that touches on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I know recently, particularly at the international level, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of work on the intersection of like mental health and climate change and climate resiliency. So contributing to various reports and position statements with the United Nations and the World Bank about specific actions that regions and countries can take in order to change policies to really prioritize mental health and climate resiliency. Um, so that's definitely one area of focus, but there's just so many things. Obviously there's like, mental health and institutionalization. That's a big thing and controversial esque topic about how that needs to be best handled. And I know had the opportunity to do some um work with, I guess, the advocacy component and policy at the state level, because I also sit on the Next Gen Youth Advisory Committee for Not Me New York State. So we've had the opportunity to work with state leadership and doing advocacy stuff for that. Homelessness, housing, uh, food insecurities. There's just so many different specific things that all are major contributors to mental health. So I guess the answer would be yes and no, or yes, I am primarily focused around mental health, but no, mental health touches on so many different things, and you can't really improve mental health without improving everything across the board.
Yeah, it really does. It affects and interconnects with so many things that you wouldn't even think of. And for one of those is mental health and climate change. And I know that there are people who are like, well, what's that kind of correlation there? How does this affect my mental health? But the primary thing that I have seen the connection being with, for example, natural disasters. When we think of mental health, a lot of times we just think of the basis of kind of my general mental health. How am I going from day to day? How is my stress? How does my stress affect me? How do I handle stress and things like that? But we forget about, especially if we don't experience, we kind of forget about how the change in the climate and the changes in the weather and the changes in the occurrence of natural disasters and things like that really affect a lot of people. And a lot of those people are at a point, maybe you're in college. Maybe you are working to support your family and you're in college, you're paying for that, whatever the case may be, and your home gets destroyed. And now you have, the town is kind of in shambles, your job is at risk or doesn't exist, and you've got to find a new home. And like all these, these things, they can really, really take a toll on your mental health, which can be how you respond to the disaster. Or say you aren't affected physically at all, but there's something that happens states away from you and it's affecting your mental health just by the experience of it happening to the world. there's a lot of things that I think if we don't go through them personally, just in general with everything that we kind of don't correlate. But I love the fact that you point that out between, the correlation between mental health and climate change. Tell me a little bit about that in more of your words.
Sure. So when I've actually, it's ironic that you want to focus on that specifically because I'm doing a presentation about it later this week. Um,
Nice.
so, so building off of that, one of the other things too, because I was doing research for the presentation, um, and I forget the exact number, but it was like a study specifically um, on youth. So I think they surveyed like 10,000 youth globally, and like around like 60% were reported, having moderate to severe symptoms of like anxiety and depression, specifically surrounding the impacts of climate change. And I think 45% of those found that those symptoms were affecting them on a day-to-day basis. Um, and that's something that comes up a lot with conversations about climate change is that, the number of younger people that are doing work in climate change versus like the older population. Not to say that there aren't a lot of people in the older population that aren't doing work on it,
Yeah.
but there's definitely a larger percentage of young activists that are really, really concerned about it because from our perspective, this is the world that we're inheriting, and we have
Yes.
to deal with all of the consequences of the actions of the generations before us. Um, so, that's there's definitely that youth component there, and the even if you aren't directly affected by a natural disaster, just the the climate change anxiety that surrounds that, particularly among the youth, is really high. Um, and then something else that I really like with like the I guess the interconnectedness between climate change and mental health is the conversation around the need to switch perspectives from it being reactionary to preventative.
Yeah.
So much
That's a good
with both
point
with
too.
both issues, it's really reactionary. There's a natural disaster that occurs, and we respond to that.
Yeah.
Someone is in mental health crisis, and we respond to that. But
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
taking the preventative steps to, mitigate those issues, to, lessen the chances of a natural disaster happening, preventing the effects of climate change, putting the support system in place so that person never gets to that mental health crisis. So again, when we're talking about both of those issues, and particularly with climate resilience, because the whole idea about that is building communities so that they're able to um, essentially appropriately handle and respond to the effects of a natural disaster. And like that's really important. But if we're getting to that point, the same thing is if we're getting to the point where someone's in crisis, we are too late. We need to be taking those preventative steps and everything we can do to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right. I absolutely agree. And yeah, absolutely agree. I think those are all really great points. It's like having a vehicle and not doing any maintenance to the vehicle until the vehicle is breaking down, right? There's monthly routine maintenance that you want to do on a vehicle to make sure it doesn't get to the point where it's falling apart. You can relate a lot of things to that. Mental health is definitely one of those. Uh, you know, I- Having you don't have any kids, right? I didn't think so. So, particular for me because like my life is parenting, so having kids, I've had, my oldest is 25 and my youngest is 10. And so in the past, not even 25 years, in the past 15 years, I've learned and adapted and educated myself on mental health because when my oldest kids were smaller, it wasn't really something that was talked about like that. It definitely wasn't talked about in school. It wasn't part of any parenting class, like teach you how to provide basic needs and things like that. But mental health itself has not been a topic of conversation until fairly recently, really, if we look back in the span of history. I remember like when people started talking and acknowledging mental health, it was like this new craze. And it's like, but really, we should always be focusing on that, like our physical health, our emotional health, those were the kind of like the focuses and not so much on mental health. And I think it's been this thing that we're really having to learn a lot about in the past 10 years or so because for so long it was overlooked. And it's just it's crazy and it's interesting and there's still a lot to learn. Um, and I think that it's really great that when we have people like you to advocate for mental health changes, policies, recognitions, the things that people are standing up about are things that have happened for a long time. But now we're like, but this is not right. Like this needs attention. And tell the listeners how someone can become an advocate. And there's big things you can do, there's small things. Let's start with kind of the door openers. How can one get into advocacy? They say, look, I don't like this. I don't think this is right. I want to help change it.
Yeah, so I think for starting and like getting involved is just finding a group or an organization that you connect with that's already doing that work. There's so many different causes, whether it's specific to mental health or something else, and that organization's already going to exist. It's just a matter of finding it and getting connected with them, and they are almost always going to be accepting volunteers and happily take you in with open arms. um, and in some cases, if it doesn't exist and you are empowered enough that you want to do something about it, you can start it.
Yeah.
So like for when I started very early on getting involved with advocacy stuff at my school, I wanted to start a student-led support group. And I know that we used to have that again before the COVID pandemic, but then it kind of died. So I kind of found out what the resources were there. And again, that was through NAMI. So I went through the process of getting trained as a student connections facilitator. And I had support, but did all the work to kind of get that group started back on campus myself because it didn't currently exist. So there's so many different resources and support systems out there. So even if you don't have this specific organization at your school or in your community, you can find the resources that you need to be able to start it as well. um, and also if you're doing that second one where you're not joining an existing organization, you're going to find people along the way that are also going to be really passionate and want to help support you on your mission of what you are trying to do, which is, again, what happened with me and what led to us starting a student-led project that expanded into a statewide program.
And also, so when I look on Brains, I just see your exclusive interview. Have you written any articles or is that it?
I've been so busy. I have not had the chance to write any articles since my interview. I'm planning to, but it's just I have a lot.
No, you're good. You're good. I paused mine for like a few months ago because I'm like I just can't right now, and I just don't see myself spending that much money a month when I can't even get to it. You know what I mean? So I totally get it. Um, when you look at it, you're like, oh, 11 articles, that's great. Like I can totally do that. But then you get busy and it's like, I only wrote like two. Okay. So I also wanted to mention, this is kind of where we met through well, I think we met through school, but it was on the Brains group. If you go to brainsmagazine.com, Taylor also is a contributor there, and you can read their exclusive interview. Just kind of talks a little bit about them, who they are, what kind of led them to advocacy and things like that. It's a nice little kind of get to know you interview. Um, and I will also leave your social media links and all those kinds of things, some and information on climate change and mental health and things like that in the description of this episode. So you guys can look for that too. And, if you want to reach out, ask questions, learn a little bit more, maybe find out how you can get involved in something that Taylor is familiar with, or, something like that, feel free to reach out. And I think that was all of my. Oh, the Youth Advisory Committee for New York. I wanted to briefly talk about that really quick too, because um, what is youth? So, what ages is youth?
Oh, that is such a good question. I get that so much. I think most people automatically would assume youth is like, oh, children, so under 18. But like when you're talking particularly at like anything involving committees and programs and stuff, it's so different everywhere.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so for mine, our definition of youth is 18 to 25, which I guess would be more like young adults. But
right.
again, it's so weird. I've also been on groups with like 14 to 25 or 16 to 25. And then obviously groups that are like only for people under 18. So it changes a lot.
Yeah,
Um, and I think a part of that is just sometimes it can be really hard to get people who are high school age or younger even comfortable to be able to, speak publicly in those spaces
yeah,
and to be able to be involved at that to that degree at that level.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. I feel like 16 or 18 to 25 is typically um what we consider youth. I'm pretty sure here it's like I think it's 18 to 25 as well. Um, and it depends really what capacity, because if you think like youth group, that I feel like that's maybe like end of I don't know. I guess it depends. It depends on the capacity. But for this capacity, typically 18 to 25. That makes sense to me too. Tell us a little bit about, so you're in New York. Tell us a little bit about your involvement on the Youth Advisory Committee.
Sure. So it is. So again, I'm with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have a signature program called Next Gen, which was started at the national level. So that was their 10-person advisory council for NAMI National, where they picked 10 people to serve on that. And then since starting at the national level, they've had a couple of different programs come out of it. So one of them was the NAMI Next Gen Community of Practice. So it was a larger group with like the 10 advisory people, along with another 40 additional people from throughout the country. And they had the inaugural run of that last year, which I also served on. So that really helped me a lot to be able to get connected both with the National Advisory Council, as well as a whole bunch of other youth that I've continued to partner and collaborate with from throughout the country. And then we also have several state next gen programs. So NAMI New York State was actually the first state to launch a statewide next gen program. So again, 10-person advisory group of youth for New York State. We have the opportunity to work directly with state leadership and on various programs and projects, as well as our lead our own. We actually have our own NAMI New York State Next Gen podcast, where each of us get to host our own episode and interview people. So that's really, really cool. And then we are currently working on planning a youth-led legislative advocacy day at the
Nice.
state capitol for next year. So I've had the opportunity to work directly with our government affairs person on that, and collaborate with some state senators as we're starting to plan that program for May 2026. So yeah, it's been really incredible. And honestly, like the beauty of next gen and like similar programs is just giving youth the space and the opportunity to get involved, because they bring like that unique perspective and they're super passionate. And it's just also such a benefit to the organization with all of the different programs and projects that they want to lead and the perspectives that they can offer, particularly when you're talking about youth advocacy and implementing policies that directly affect youth.
I wanted to also briefly touch on, we kind of mentioned earlier about why it's important for this generation to get involved. But I just wanted to kind of reiterate that because, the children are the future, as they say, but the youth really is the generation that's going to be carrying what we've made of this world. And while it also is important for us as older generations to focus on mental health and to take better care of our planet and things like that, you know, I- it is really it's equally as important, but it is important, for I just turned 40. And I think for me, there's certain things that I should be paying attention to, involving my community and things around me, because not even if just for me, but I have kids and I will have a grandchild soon and things like that. And, like we we need to take care of each other. And I think that's another thing that's kind of lost too at some points is even if I'm not doing this for me, there's younger generations that this is important for. We look back at how things were when our parents were younger, and they're much different. And it's going to be the same way with us and our kids. And, so it's important for everybody to help and to be involved. And, but like you said, this is really the generation that it's going to affect the most. Um, I also wanted to point out that you can reach out to your local senators, and this is anybody. You can always reach out to your local senators and say, hey, this is a topic that I think needs attention, or, like little things that you notice. And I don't mean like, well, I don't agree with blah, 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 because that's my political view. I mean, things that are like, hey, this is affecting our health as a community. This is affecting our safety as a community, and things like that. This is affecting our mental well-being as a community. You know, I, that's it's something that my husband pointed out not too long ago, and I was like, you know what, you are so right. Even things like this road has a lot of potholes and it's been really, really neglected, and it's like banging up our cars. And most of the time, the people who would fix things and pay attention and be responsible for things are not seeing these things on a day-to-day basis. And so for them, even it's important for people to reach out to communicate and let people know, hey, this is what's going on in our local community. So I think that's a really important thing for people to know, that use your voice, even if it's just you're advocating for your community by reaching out to someone who has the power to help change things. It's important to use your voice.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't, you can start locally, and you can start just by communication. If you don't feel comfortable going as far as to joining a group or, something like that, start with the little
I
things.
mean, I know we have two more episodes coming up, which I'm super excited for as well. But I think
Yes.
this really, really great discussion.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to having you back. We have a couple. Our next two topics are a little more personal and a little more intense, I guess you would say, to a degree. Which, I like having the deep topics, the deep conversations. I love conversations like this too, because I think that educating people is really important. But I'm looking forward to our next two as well, because those are pretty deep, and I'm really excited to hear both your personal experience and your personal journey through. So I'm looking forward to it.
Same here.
All right. Well, thank you so, so much for being here. I can't wait to have you back, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Check us out on YouTube at Reah Higgs, ReahHagues. You can also keep up with us on Instagram at Just the Who Podcast.